Be heard today. And I tell you what, it's wet out there. My backyard's looking a little bit like a pond. I don't know if anybody else is that way. And so it happens. And it's better that than snow, for a lot of you. To me, I wish it were snow. I just love the snow, but my kids don't want to miss any more school. And I'm sure the parents don't either. And so it's a good reason to be thankful for the rain. I appreciate you, encouraging me. You're enjoying this series on the 10 Commandments and the 10 Anti-Commandments that I've been going through. As last week I finished two parts of don't follow your heart, as that's not a commandment that's really, the Bible speaks against that. And today I'm talking about idols. And so this is an interesting one. And so the title of this one is No Idle Time. Okay, some of you may appreciate that pun, or that little phrase there. And so you can recognize this picture here. It's not our pew, but it's similar to a pew that we grew up with, right? Now pews in a lot of churches are going away. It's a lot of chairs now, but still these pews are iconic of church, okay? And so it's interesting. When you think of church, what do you think about? Go ahead and tell them, raise your hand. What do you think about when you hear the word church? What do you think about? Do what? God, good. What else? Sunday? Baptized, good. Gathering together, good. Well, you guys are giving really good answers. Give me some bad answers. Well, I tell you, and I think about all that, but honestly, when I first hear church, I think of a building. Anybody else? It's just in my, I grew up real little and in church, and that little song, all that there, and opened up, and all there's the people, right? And even though I was taught with the words of the church is the people, the assembly, ecclesia, the Greek there, but almost every time the word church came up, they showed a picture of a building. Now a lot of times we're changing that. We're showing people, because we know the people are the church. Well, Jesus is the church, and we are his body, right? And so it's interesting, though, how much we put the building in connection with the church, the idea of church. So that's going to come up a little bit. And so this is the second commandment about idols. And it's interesting that I put a little I there on purpose, so we don't make it too important. Look at this passage again. Follow along with me. This is Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. And so this is immediately after that you should have no other God before me, as you can see up here on the side. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. And so this idea of idols are pretty interesting. And you may think, is this a relevant one? Maybe you thought, well, maybe David's going to skip this one and go straight to the third one. Because is this important now? Do we struggle with having graven images as idols? And I think yes. I think we do struggle with it. And honestly, it's getting worse. These idols, these graven images are coming in. We say graven images because they're graved out, kind of made, handmade out of something earthen to resemble something, and we put spiritual importance on it. And there's actually very many examples in the Bible of the Israelites struggling with idol worship. Now, they actually had the little gods represented Baal and El and other things. And so why did they struggle so much with that back then? Well, they came from Egypt, and they brought that idea with them. And so it was part of their society, to be honest. And so we're going to see there's a lot of problems that came with that because they were entrenched in that. And I think a lot of them looked up to the Egyptian people and saw them as prosperous, the masters, and maybe envied them and maybe wondered, you think this thought ever came to them? Maybe they are the ones that are the masters and we are the slaves because, look, we can see their gods. Now remember, they were there for 440 years about. So that's a long time. Could they remember? Of course not. But could they remember and have, really passion for where they came from after 440 years? I don't know. That would be really hard, wouldn't it? That would be really hard. Where did you come from? Where's your family come from 440 years ago? Now, some of you may know, or you have an idea. How many of you have taken one of those tests, a DNA test, to figure out where you come from? Yeah, I have too. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see where they say where I came from. I'm about 2/3 right there on the east side of England, and 1/3 Scandinavian, and I'm 1% from, I forgot my heritage. Nigerian, 1% Nigerian, which is obvious. But it's interesting that we have that, right? You look at that, it's like, oh, I had no idea, and I had to test my blood to see what that is. I thought, I was mostly English, but didn't know that. Now, you think, wouldn't it be something if we could do that spiritually? I'd like to take my spiritual blood test. I'm sure I know what I am, but I just want confirmation. Now, there's been a lot of people that were sure where they came from, this blood test, and they're surprised. Okay? They're surprised. I imagine if we do spiritual blood tests, who is my father? Is it God in heaven or the other one? Wouldn't it be neat if we could figure that out just like that? I think there would be some people that would be surprised. And I bring that up because one aspect of idol worship is coming in our culture even more, is this idea of ancestry worship. Ancestry worship. And people, brag so much about their ancestors, which is fine, but to the point of worshiping them. Have you ever had something maybe passed down generations that you have strong sentimental value to? That's fine to have sentimental value to. Do you bring spiritual importance to it? You see something that's like, well, that's my grandmother. Every time I see that, I think of my grandmother, I say a little prayer. To her? Now, I think when we say that, say a little prayer, we think we're saying it to God, but we almost are speaking to them. So that can be something, that's an example of an idol that can come into our life. So a danger also is in marrying outside of the faith. And you may think this is very trivial, but you marry someone outside the faith, then you become half of that faith. You bring that in. And so this was a huge warning from God. Don't marry people outside the faith because you are enticing yourself to fall away or bringing in other beliefs. And this was very problematic to the early Jewish people, because a lot of times they married people outside of Israel, outside from the Israelite community, and they would bring their God, physical God, into the relationship. And there's many examples of that happening, and God would not bless them as much until they got rid of them. So this happens, that we have these gods. And so we are quickly becoming a country with different beliefs. I'm very pro-immigrant. Of course, my wife is Armenian, and my mother-in-law lives with us, and she's Armenian, so I'm very pro coming in right, of course, and I'm very pro-immigrant. And people would say we're a biracial family. It's interesting, isn't it? That's how they would see us. And I quickly tried to tell them, I believe that there's only one race, the human race. We're all pretty much the same on the inside here. And also spiritually, we're the same. We have the same spiritual needs. And we also have the same spiritual failings that we struggle with. So really, the definition of an idol is an image or representation of a god used as an object of worship. So maybe that probably brings to mind to you like a Buddha statue or something like that. But if you think about what meets that criteria, a image, doesn't have to be physical, but an image of something that represents a god, which I talked about a few weeks ago from the number 1 commandment, what could be a god for you, and used as an object of worship. And so how do you define worship, right? I would say anything you dedicate towards and you praise and laud up to and sacrifice for, okay? I would say any of that is, you could be worshiping that. And so our idols, I want us to think about this a little bit. Look what it says here in Isaiah 46. And God was disgusted with the Israelites falling to the gods of Baal and Marduk. And so listen, to whom would you liken me? This is God speaking here through Isaiah. And make me equal and compare me, that we would be alike. Those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale, hire a goldsmith and he makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed they worship it. They lift it up on the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from his distress. Okay? Cry to it. Ask to be delivered. And you may think, oh, that's so silly. We don't struggle with that anymore. We don't have a little statue that we think is a god and we don't cry to it. Well, maybe we struggle with it. Now, these idols go with the false gods that I mentioned a few weeks ago. Do you remember what those were? Like sports. Well, surely there's not an idol that goes along with that, right? Now, these idols could be different depending on what sports team is your favorite. Could that image bring up some kind of emotion to you? That's right. For the last 5 years, we're 500, 0-1. You know? Your pride, of course. And there's nothing wrong being prideful of a sports team. I don't have much pride lately of my sports team, but nevertheless, you can be prideful of your sports team and maybe worship it. You see someone else wears the symbol, you go, hey, how's it going? That's right. We're together, right? I remember the first time I heard this, I was in Gatlinburg at a Winterfest for our young teenagers, and I was there as a recruiter for a university, and I heard someone say OH, and someone said IO. I'm like, what's going on here? It's like a bird call or something. and I asked them, I was like, what are you guys doing? I was like, are you lost? Are you trying to find your kids or what? And it's like, no, it's Ohio. I was like, wow. It's like, we should do that. T-E-N-N. E-S-S-A. Gotta catch my breath. You know, but it's interesting. You see how people can be to a team or just sports in general. How about money? That was one of the gods I mentioned. Does anybody worship this? Could this be an image? When people see this, do they get excited? Ooh. Have you ever seen one of those prank things on YouTube where they put like a half of a $20 bill and they get a string or something? It seems like I see all these in Gatlinburg. But I've seen this in Gatlinburg too. They get one folded and you open it up and it says, gotcha, you know, and you know, they get so angry. But when they see it, they're like, ooh, they pick up a little quick, they look around and they grab it, right? Because what does it mean to them? What it can do for them, right? This only is appreciated because what it can do for me. Why do people back in the day, why do they like so much these physical idols? What they can do for them. I'll take care of you. I'll bring food to you. Idol made out of stone. And I'll take care of you as long as you bless me. Continue to bless me, oh dollar bill. Give me what I want. It can be an idol. How about religious idols? It's okay, I'm Christian. I don't have any more idols anymore. Well, you know, in my time living in Russia and being other places around the world, you know, spending quite a bit going to different countries in Central America and South America, I see things like this. This is an icon. You know, and they are thought to have strong spiritual significance. Okay? Whether you go to an Orthodox church in Russia or you go to a Catholic church in some other places, these things carry strong spiritual meanings for some people. And to touch it is either, you know, you'll be blessed or cursed, depending on your heart. And you'd even maybe perhaps, I know in Russia, you could buy a candle and put it there in front of it, and you have these different icons for different things. You light the candle there, and it takes your prayer to that saint, who would then take it to God on your behalf. Now, I talked to a priest in Russia before, talking to him about that. He's like, what do you think about these icons? Do you think they really have power? It's like, no, of course not. I said, well, why do you have them? And he flat out told me, it's easier to control the people this way. I was like, but there's no spiritual power. It's like, yes, but it gives people something to focus on. And so in almost every taxi you go in Russia and other places, around the rearview mirror, very high place to put them, you have these little icons of whoever. Now this is Mary, the mother of Jesus. And they think very highly of her. And so to this physical painting, they put great spiritual significance. Now, when I asked you about what do you think about when you hear the word church, the building and these pews become iconic of what the church is. And it's interesting, have you ever heard of this area called a sanctuary? Now, we don't refer to it that way, but when they come in, you may come into some, they have water there at the front to put on you to make you holier, because this is a holy place. Now, what makes a place holy? Where God is, right? We see that example with Moses. The burning bush was there, and Moses came there, and God says, take off your sandals because you're on holy ground. What made it holy? It wasn't the ground, it was God. So where's God today? In his children. For all of us that are baptized believers, God is us. So we are holy ground before God. And so it's not these idols. But these idols sneak out in our life. They sneak out and they kind of creep their way in our life. Before we know it, we have spiritual attachment to physical things. Whether it be grandma's whatever something, or a Bible passed down generations, and you give it spiritual significance to this physical thing. Now, it can have great sentimental value, but to think that it's got power to heal, to comfort you, spiritually comfort you, it can emotionally comfort you, but can it spiritually comfort you? No, I don't think so. Do you worship any of these things, these pictures or money that I showed you an example of? Now, if you're like me, I'm a creature of habit, and I like to go consistently to the same place to pray in the mornings when I come in to the office and be in a ritual. And that little place becomes kind of holy for me. And you can do that to a certain point to where that place becomes holy and in your mind, and you give too much importance to it. And so tradition, which I start doing and you do out of convenience, becomes tradition, and out of tradition it becomes, sacrament for you, although it's not a sacrament. We have very few sacraments here, right? But it's not these. So it's interesting that it's more believable when we do these things when we're done in groups. So when you get together in a group of people, let's say Orthodox or Buddhist group there, and everybody's doing it like you, then it's easier to believe, hey, look, I'm okay. They're doing it too. That's why it's so good to go into Scripture and see what it says. Obviously, what God is saying is like you should have no idle time. No idle time whatsoever in your life. That you laud up and praise other things, even close to me. So if you have anything that competes your time with God, or comes ahead of God, that you go to instead of God for help, then you're in trouble. It's like, God, don't worry, I'm not going to bother you about this. I've got my idol. It's going to help me out. Now, this is a tool, right? This is a tool that, of course, we can use. And other things are tools to help us maybe release stress and things like that. But we don't need to put spiritual significance on them like they're going to save us spiritually, right? I've heard people say things like that. I just need to go there and it's kind of like my little salvation. It helps me when I watch this or that. So when you have an idol, then it needs you. A physical idol, it needs you. And it's interesting how they do that. That people can put great spiritual significance to something that they made or had made for them. And just a couple thousand years ago, even more recent than that, every family kind of had an idol. Right? Gideon was called to destroy his family idols. Right? So it's a big issue. Look here, Deuteronomy 4:15 through 18. So watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, so that you do not act corruptly and make a graven image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water below the earth. And beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole earth. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but when I first read that, I think of mascots. Every team or group has a mascot. Isn't that interesting? Like some kind of bird or animal or something, they have a mascot. They're like, yay! We're the Buckeyes or whatever it may be. And you kind of get a close affinity to that thing. And it can be dangerous that we get that way. But God cannot. And it's interesting here that he says, did I come in any shape? Did I come in the image of anything when I came to you at Horeb and helped you out so much? No, I didn't. And isn't it interesting that God, I think, did this such a wise way? He gave the Ten Commandments not in Israel, but he did it in a desert. So it wouldn't be in one of the 12 tribes to give anyone like a higher status. That's where we got the Ten Commandments. Or really in any country. It was kind of like a deserted place back then that no one wanted to be there because they was universal to everybody. So these Ten Commandments are for everybody of all cultures. We can't say that's for the Jewish people or this is for that time period, but this is for everybody for all time. So God was like, don't make an image for me that you can control me, carry me around. Wisely, he didn't present himself in any way like that. And so one thing definitely we can get from this passage of Deuteronomy is we need to make sure that we don't worship the creation, which we are so apt to do. Whether we go to nature, see a waterfall, I love all these things, animals are beautiful things, but we shouldn't worship them. Appreciate without worship is something that we should do. Okay? Exodus 32:4-5 says, he took this from their hand and fashioned it. This is while Moses is up on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments. This is Aaron. And fashioned it with a graven tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Now, he wasn't trying to create a new God. He was trying to say, this is Jehovah God. Okay? But I'll make it in a calf so you can focus on him. And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. Okay? So sad. This was an idol made to represent Jehovah. And he did this while God is writing the commandments of this right here. You shouldn't be doing it. Now, Moses, of course, was furious about this and broke the Ten Commandments that God made with his own hand. And then he ended up doing it again with his own hand, in his own handwriting. It'd be so cool to see God's handwriting there, but he threw it down and broke them. But they made this idol not to go against Jehovah, but as a representation so they can better focus and celebrate. I hear people say that, where they get a little cross to wear around their neck. Now, if you do all these things, any of these, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but be careful. Be very careful, because you can very easily put too much attention on something physical and put spiritual importance to it, like a necklace or a picture. of Jesus, it can be dangerous. And that little picture of Jesus that may be passed down 2 generations, you put a lot of spiritual importance to when it's really just a rendering, okay? So we need to protect ourselves and make sure we don't have any of these idols that try to creep into our life. So religion for us is very spiritual, okay? Very spiritual, of course. And so this idea of having no idle time, we need to check and make sure that we're not spending time glorifying any idols in our life. If we nip things in the bud, then it won't be harder to take out of our lives later. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says this, "For now we see as through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known." Now this is the love chapter. And so he's talking about love and talking about relationship with God. And I appreciate what was said this morning. It's difficult to understand everything spiritual, isn't it? And everything, a relationship with God. But understanding is not necessary for obedience. Probably a lot of us parents say that to our kids sometimes. And God, maybe some things He tells us to do and asks us to do, we don't quite fully understand. But we need to be obedient. That's why it says, through a glass darkly. It's not super clear, everything. But one day we're going to be face to face. And that's going to be amazing. I can't even comprehend it. And then it follows up here, coming up here, with this idea that we speak in words and ways that aren't easily understood by outsiders. You know, when I speak brother and sister to you, and we'll say, I love you, and it's obviously we're not family. Some people outside was like, that's kind of strange. You're saying love to someone that's obviously not your family. Why do you do that? It's like, well, we've got a tighter bond than with my physical family now. We're spiritually together. And it's going to be difficult for them to understand that. But faith, hope, and love. Any kind of idol that you have, whether it be a sports team or hobby, whatever it may be, money, or an icon, can they help you in these times of need with faith, hope, and love? Of course not. Verse 13, the next verse there, 3 things will last forever. Faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. You can't put these great spiritual things in something that's physical. God is not physical. He can't be physically contained. Now, we are an enigma of that in a way. We are spiritual beings. Our soul has no shape, does not have any physical representation. Even though there are cultures that try to put their soul, they get a little figure and say, this is my soul. And they have to protect it. If anything happens to that physical thing, it's damage to their soul. Okay? But like God, not representing any shape, our soul is not representing any shape. Because faith, hope, and love, like smoke. You can see it, but you can't touch it. You know it's there. And so we need to understand and continue to grow and mature as people. And be aware that these idols creep into our life. Now, I'm not asking you to go and burn all your sports paraphernalia. I would have a fire in my backyard, pretty big, if I did that. But, you know, we need to appreciate without spiritually admiring, without worshiping these things. And so like the first commandment, these gods, and the second commandment, trying to come in with a physical representation and take over a little corner of our life. And what it does is it starts pulling us away from God. And God is a jealous God. We know that. Let's have a prayer this morning. Father God, we thank you so much for this day. How great and wonderful and holy you are. Father, please help us. Sometimes we get prideful and haughty and think, oh, this is an easy lesson, this is an easy topic. But Father God, we know pride comes before a fall. That's when we can be tempted to be overconfident and let something into our life that we shouldn't. Please help us to guard our hearts and not let anything bad in. Let us hold you in high esteem only above all else. We love you so much. Please be with those of us that are sick and those that still don't feel comfortable to come yet. Please comfort them, dear Lord, and let them know that we love and miss them. Please be with us as we go out this week and represent you. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen. If you need the prayers of the church, or you want to become a Christian, or maybe you haven't been back in church for a while and you need to get reconnected, please come forward as we sing this song.